Welcome to the Cardboard Crash Course. My name's Ethan, and this is the Twilight Imperium channel. Today we'll be going over all 30, yes, 30 of the Twilight Imperium factions from the base game, Prophecy of Kings expansion, and now the Thunder's Edge expansion as well. This is tied into the Beginner's Guide to Twilight Imperium. That's also up on the channel and will be in a card on the top right-hand corner of the screen. That video is your go-to for the basic mechanics and strategy of the game, and this video ties to it in being an introduction and a bite-sized package to each of the 30 factions. This video is perfect for beginners whether or not you have the expansions as well, because all of the base game factions will still retain most of their identity whether or not they've been updated with the Prophecy of Kings or Thunder's Edge expansion. Also, if there's something that truly changes the faction because of one of the expansions, I'll note that so that you know what you're getting into if you just have the base game. The Prophecy of Kings expansion added leaders to the factions, and the Thunder's Edge expansion added breakthroughs to the factions. So yes, they're changed up, but they're still the base core idea from the base game one way or another. If a faction is from one of the two expansions, I'll also leave the expansion symbol up on screen so that you know that it's not part of the base game. So without further ado, let's jump right into the factions, starting in alphabetical order with the Arborec. The Arborec is kind of your stereotypical plant faction. It plants and slowly grows on the different planets that you reach throughout the galaxy. Now, their space docks are special because their space docks cannot produce infantry. That means that they can't make any more of the actual guys that will be on the planets. Instead, your infantry come from your production of your infantry. That's right, your infantry themselves have production, and they can make more and more infantry, including with your mitosis ability on your faction sheet. The Arborec are super slow growing and pretty beginner friendly, but I wouldn't expect to win with them, especially if you're only playing a 10-point game. If you're playing to the longer 14 points, they can truly shine because they slowly build up there in power over the long term, but their short-term start is not that great. That being said, the Prophecy of Kings expansion added the Agent to the Arborec. The Agent allows them to sort of fix up their start and make themselves a little stronger at the beginning of the game. But the true power comes from their breakthrough in the Thunder's Edge expansion. Their breakthrough allows them to sort of cheat the system and grow faster through the galaxy than they normally would be able to. So if you're planning on playing the Arborec, definitely see whether or not your host has the Thunder's Edge expansion, because I believe it truly changes the game for them. Next up, we have the Argent Flight. So the Argent Flight is one of like 6 factions that I would absolutely offer to beginners. The Argent Flight comes from the Prophecy of Kings expansion, and they're pretty straightforward. They kind of have a little bit of everything, but mostly their destroyers are very strong, and they have special anti-fighter barrage, which means that during the anti-fighter barrage step where they shoot off like a ton of missiles, those can also hit ships and make them sustain damage as well, which is cool to just have a volley of things. The Argent Flight can also set up walls so that you can't actually get to where you need to go and sort of create this big protection zone towards their home system. And they also are really poor at voting towards the late game. They make up for that by being pretty strong in the early game with voting and also act as religious militaristic zealots. So if you want to put your foot down and be a militaristic mite, the Argent Flight is the one for you as a beginner. Next up is the Barony of Letnev. This is the big, beefy dudes faction. So this faction doesn't have a lot of economy value and really doesn't do well in trading off to other players. So if you want to play a military faction that is all about having a ton of ships in one system and the largest fleet on the game board of big ships, not just tiny little fighters, but big fleets, the Barony of Letnev is definitely your go-to. I would say the Barony has a major problem with economy and keeping up with the pace money-wise as everybody else at the table, unless you have the Thunder's Edge expansion, which did tweak them up and make their ships more mobile and better at defending. I wouldn't necessarily suggest them to new players if you really want to win the game, because the different objectives that pop up may not actually be what the Barony of Letnev is looking at, but in terms of just holding your own and getting to punch people in the face, that's what the Barony is pretty good at. Alright, we're coming to the Clan of Saar. So the Clan of Saar might be one of the strongest factions in the entire game, and that all comes down to the nomadic ability. Nomadic means that you don't have to control your home system in order to score public objectives. So normally you have to control all of the planets in your home system, and that's why somebody like the Argent Flight struggles a little bit with the 3 planets, because if they lose any of those 3, then they can't score objectives. The Clan of Saar does not have this problem. They can go anywhere they want, and they act as these, like, asteroid rats, where they actually reach the asteroid field and hunker down there. So if you want to play this nomadic, sort of cheating the game race, then I would play as the Saar. Additionally, the Saar can also move their space docks, so they're a little bit more mechanically involved than some of the beginner factions that I'll show you later in the video. But the Clan of Saar being able to move their space docks essentially means that as their fleet moves across the galaxy, it continues to snowball more and more, because as it moves, it creates more ships. And those ships can hunker down in asteroid fields. So the Clan of Saar basically just roll across the galaxy, destroying things in their wake, and leaving their home system behind, saying, I don't care about this at all. They're interesting, but a little mechanically involved, and their breakthrough didn't really add too much in Thunder's Edge because they're already pretty top tier. Alright, now we have the Council Keleres, or as I used to pronounce them, I guess wrongly, Council Keleres. Either way, when you're talking to me, I won't mind what you call them. But this was printed originally in the 3rd edition of the Twilight Imperium Codex. That means that they were originally a print and play faction. So what's interesting is they don't actually have any cardboard tokens alongside them. They've since been officially printed in the Thunder's Edge expansion, so if you want an official printing of them, they come with the other 5 new factions in that expansion. The Keleres have an incredibly powerful breakthrough that you want to get at the beginning of the game. So basically, they control the seat of the Galactic Council. They can manipulate laws, turn them off for themselves, all the while they're controlling one of 3 unchosen factions. So basically, as you're setting up the game, you choose between Mentak, Xxcha, or the Argent Flight, and one of those that are unchosen you take the home system and all of the command tokens for. They're fun, and they have an amazing economy, because they can continuously just make money instead of having to trade it to other people to do so. However, I definitely would not suggest them for a beginner, because you have to know about the game going into it, as you have to make choices even during setup. So this is one of those factions that, as you play more and more and more of Twilight Imperium, you'll understand how to start with them, but generally I would try to stay away. They're not too mechanically complex once you actually start the game, so if your host wants to pick for you, you can do that, but there's other factions that I would choose before them if you're just starting out. Okay, let's talk about the Crimson Rebellion. Now, this is a little weird because we're going to talk about Ghosts of Creuss in just a few minutes, but the Crimson Rebellion are basically a different version of a very classic faction. The Rebellion control these things called breaches. Basically, all over the game board, they'll be ripping open space-time in order to create adjacency for themselves and move all over the game board wherever they want. On top of this, your home system cannot be taken, because anybody who tries to take your home system has to blow everything up that reaches that system. Basically, they have just as powerful of an ability as the Clan of Saar did that I was talking about earlier. Basically, the Crimson Rebellion rely on 2 things, and that's combat and positioning. Combat because no matter what combat is going on the game board, they benefit from it, not just their own. Also, positioning is great for them because if they can open up breaches in perfect spots, they can have ways to retreat and to get where they need to go. This is not at all a good beginner faction because this is the only faction that starts with their breakthrough. So you're thinking about technology synergies and the weirdness of the Thunder's Edge expansion from the get-go. On top of this, they also have a very low commodity value and not very strong leaders, so you're not super self-sufficient. You have to be combat-focused and thinking ahead a couple of rounds. That being said, they are one of the most pure, rule of cool factions in the whole game. I mean, look at them. They're just messed up ghost dudes. I want to play as them so bad. Now we have the Deepwrought Scholaret. So the Deepwrought are exciting because I actually got to show them off on the channel, and you can check out that card in the top right hand corner if you want to see an interview with the lead designer of Twilight Imperium after this. But basically, have you ever played a group hug deck in Magic the Gathering? The idea is that the Deepwrought are friends with the entire table. They like to make the table richer in order to get benefits themselves. This is an alternative to a faction that we're going to check out towards the end of the video, the Universities of Jol-Nar, because although the Jol-Nar like to keep all the technologies for themselves, the Deepwrought likes to give them to everybody. But those factions that you're giving it to have to give you something in return, including something called coexistence. Coexistence is the reason why I would not suggest the Deepwrought Scholaret to a new player. Although the Deepwrought are the most beginner-friendly of all of the Thunder's Edge expansion factions, I don't think I would recommend any of those factions to a new player. Coexistence basically allows you to exist on the same planet as another person, giving you benefits but not letting you actually control the planet. It introduces a lot of mechanical complexity, and I don't think a new player is ready at all for the Deepwrought. But if you're a more experienced player and you like to not only bluff, but also wheel and deal the entire table for however many hours the game is going to go for, that is the embodiment of the Deepwrought. Alright, we're getting into a little bit more of a simple faction again, the Embers of Muaat. And I don't necessarily mean mechanical complexity, because they're a little higher in that, but just the idea of them is simpler. The Embers is the Warsun faction. The Warsun is basically a Death Star. It's a giant battle station with a million guns pointed outward that can move halfway across the galaxy and blow stuff up. The Embers of Muaat has a very self-sufficient economy with something called Starforge. They can spend their own tokens in order to continuously produce things on their Warsuns. If you're a beginner, as long as you don't forget about the Starforge ability and using it consistently, I would say the Embers of Muaat is not too mechanically insane. They're up there, but they're not absolutely the highest, and they have a couple of cool things from the expansions. The Prophecy of Kings expansion added something called Nova Seed. It's their hero and allows them to replace a tile on the game board with a supernova, which is basically a sun. They're also the only faction in the game that can stay inside of supernovas, so you get to nuke a system, turning it into a giant ball of fire, and you're the only person that can go and stay inside of that. Then on the other side, the Thunder's Edge expansion introduced Avernus. It's their breakthrough, and it's a planet that they get to birth out of nothing. The planet is created under their control and assists with the Starforge ability. Not only that, but it can also move around the galaxy, so they can sort of tugboat it around with their Warsuns. They are the faction that can go around and blow stuff up. It's pretty exciting. Alright, next is the Emirates of Hacan. So the Hacan is a very classic faction, and it's the money faction. They have 6 commodities, which is twice as much as most other factions in the game, so they can create twice as many deals with anybody. Additionally, they don't have to be neighbors in order to trade with somebody, which basically means at the beginning of the game, everybody is your trade partner with no restrictions. They can also trade action cards with players, which is not something you can normally do, so they open up even more possibilities, not just because they're neighbors with everybody. The Emirates of Hacan are incredibly beginner-friendly, if you know how to wheel and deal the table. They're sort of like the Deepwrought Scholarate, but not nearly as complex because they're just basically rich and everybody wants to trade with the rich person. They're also very good at scoring objectives because a lot of objectives have you score different things by spending money or with things that cost money. So the Emirates just have a naturally easy time at playing the game. Okay, it's kind of funny that the Empyrean is directly after the Hacan, because they're sort of the evil version from a certain point of view. The Empyrean really embody two things. First is making pacts, and literally, if you have the Thunder's Edge expansion, causing a tollway system so that only your friends can come through. The second is that they're all about deep space. They're from the Prophecy of Kings expansion, and they entirely have to do with frontier tokens on the board. Their hero even replaces a ton of frontier tokens, and frontier, especially with the Thunder's Edge expansion that printed the codex, becomes incredibly powerful. They start off with Dark Energy Tap, which is the way to explore frontier tokens, and they have bonuses for going out into empty space, including having a ton of bonuses for being neighbors with as many players as possible. They can force people to give them promissory notes, and they can allow them passage and even speed up their ships as long as those players are moving through anomalies. They even have two promissory notes, a Blood Pact and a Dark Pact, one of which allows you and the person you have the pact with to vote for the same thing during an agenda and have those votes get increased. You can rule the game if you're very particular about where your ships are and where your friendships lie. Alright, going from one of the weirdest factions to one of the most simple factions, we have the Federation of Sol. The Sol are the humans, and they're kind of boring, but in a not boring way. Let me explain. The Federation allows you to get extra command tokens, and if you're coming from the beginner's guide on the channel, you know that the command tokens are the lifeblood of your game. The Federation also has very strong boots on the ground soldiers. So essentially, they get to do slightly more than everybody else, and they get to take planets a little bit easier than most factions. They also have a slightly higher commodity value, so they're nice to trade with. They have higher capacity in their ships, which allows them to move soldiers wherever they need around the game board, and the orbital drop ability drops down soldiers where they're most needed in the perfect moment. They're definitely not mechanically complex, and you basically just have to understand that you're the flexible faction that can do slightly more of just what the game has to offer than most players. Other than having stronger ground forces than most players, I just think the Federation of Sol is the most versatile faction. So if you want to play something that just allows you to play TI without worrying too much about what your faction does, I would play the Federation of Sol. Okay, this is a faction that doesn't even feel right being in a beginner's guide, but I guess I have to talk about them anyway. This is the Firmament. The Firmament is really two factions in one. As you'll see, I also have the Obsidian faction sheet with me. So the Firmament in the lore believed that the Imperium should not even be a thing, and the Imperial throne doesn't matter to them. So they're not actually that strong, but they are plotting. The Firmament schemes towards other players at the beginning of the game, and they place plot cards all over the game board as the game is going on, allowing other players to get involved in the Firmament's plots. Now the Firmament is all leading up to a single choice at some point in the game, and that is when to turn into the Obsidian faction. The Obsidian takes the Firmament and all of the cards and everything that goes with the Firmament and throws it out of the game, becoming the Obsidian and taking all of the Obsidian components. You are now playing the Obsidian, and the Obsidian is much, much stronger depending on what you did while you were the Firmament. So all of the players that were involved in your plots, you're now puppeteering them. And you have a ton of money that you stashed away during the Firmament. They also have a really, really powerful, straightforward hero as the Obsidian, and this is the faction that you play into the late game. As you can tell, this is not a beginner-friendly faction. This is one of 4 factions and we haven't seen any of the other 3, but this is one of 4 that I'm going to tell you, please do not play them as a new player. The lore might sound cool, but you're not going to have a good time. I promise you. Okay, if you remember the Crimson Rebellion, let's jump into the Ghosts of Creuss. This is the more straightforward version of a positioning faction. They're all about wormholes, and the wormholes that are printed on the game board is only the beginning for them. This faction can create wormholes all over the place, and their flagship is even a Delta wormhole, which is shared with their home system. The Delta wormhole is their specific type of wormhole that their home system is one space away from the game board utilizing it. They do, however, start with gravity drive, and I normally don't talk about faction technologies and starting technologies and everything in a beginner's guide, but gravity drive is that movement capability technology which allows you to boost the movement of ships. So they get to speed around the game board, position themselves wherever, opening up wormholes, and allowing players to move through those wormholes if they pay them enough. This is just your classic positioning weirdo faction. They also have a higher than normal commodity value, so they're not actually bad at trading with players. This is the version of the Crimson Rebellion that's the original and not as destructive. Last Bastion is both complex and not so complex. Last Bastion comes from the Thunder's Edge expansion, and they have to do with this mechanic called galvanizing. You can galvanize your units after they participate in combat but survive, and they also start out with barely any units and a really weak and poor home system. Now, they're the only faction to have a legendary planet in their home system, and that makes up for a little bit of their economy, but it does add a layer of complexity to the Last Bastion, because you're starting off super weak, but actually kind of powerful in a different way. Now, even though they don't start with many infantry, and they don't have a lot of money to make many infantry, if you have enough infantry when they hit a planet, you can actually ready that planet. So this is one of the only factions that can gain planets readied, which means that they can make up for their economy in weird ways. They basically have not many units, not much money, but what they do have is incredibly strong. I would go away from them if you're a new player because they're kind of complex in that way that you feel super weak towards the beginning of the game, but I imagine that once the Last Bastion hits their stride, they'll start to become a powerhouse, and possibly even more of a threat on the ground than the Federation of Sol. I like the Last Bastion, and I think they're definitely in there for contention with the Deepwrought for the most beginner-friendly Thunder's Edge expansion faction, but I would probably stay away from them. It's a legendary planet and a space station in your home system, along with being a nebula, all of which adds more complexity from the very beginning of the game. So make your choices. I'm not going to say absolutely not to a new player if they love the idea, but I would probably say stick to someone else because you might have a hard time understanding the game. The L1Z1X MindNet is a creepy faction of these semi-cyborg robotic creatures that may or may not be the previous rulers of the galaxy, the Lazaks. Regardless of their lore, their main ability is to assimilate. When they reach planets, they replace a lot of the things that are on those planets with their own things, kind of like a zombie virus almost, but in a more mechanical way. They also are allowed to bombard every single combat round, which basically means not only at the beginning of the combat can you shoot down rains of hellfire onto planets, but also just during the combat you can continuously bombard the planet to take those planets easier. Now, they don't have any stronger ground forces like the Last Bastion or Federation of Sol do, but they do have stronger dreadnoughts. So you have the ability to take systems a little bit easier, and when you reach those systems, you benefit because they don't have to pay so much getting things back onto the planets. They also have a really high resource value home system, but they have a really low influence. So you can't have too many command tokens on the game board or else you're going to run out of options. Basically, if you can get that issue under control and get their economy running, then the L1 aren't too crazy complex, and I would almost pick them for a new player, above a couple of others. Alright, remember how I said there's 4 factions I don't want you to play as if you're a new player? This is number 2, but I'm going to explain them anyway. The Mahact Gene Sorcerers are all about stealing other players' abilities, forcing them to do what they want them to do, and getting around the very basic mechanics of Twilight Imperium. The Mahact can break TI because they can take players' command tokens off the game board, including their own. Additionally, they can reactivate their systems that already have tokens in order to remove those tokens. So overall, if what I just said doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you because you're new, you probably shouldn't play the Mahact, because that is the entire idea of the faction. Also, throughout the game, as you win combats with the Mahact, you can take the other player's abilities forcefully. So in the Prophecy of Kings expansion, there's a thing called an Alliance Promissory Note, which allows you to peacefully give other players your commander's ability if it's unlocked, which is a persistent ability. The Mahact do not have an Alliance Promissory Note. Instead, they just rip the powers from the other player forcefully as long as they win combats against them. The Mahact are all about building an infinity gauntlet of other players' powers and using them to strengthen their own already powerful faction abilities. They're really mean, sort of combat focused, and you kind of become enemy number 1 at the table. Not quite as much as the Volrath Cabal, which we'll see later, but the Mahact are mostly mean and really strong. So if you want to win, you could try to understand them, but good luck. If you're okay with pissing off the entire table and having no friends because you keep stealing everybody's money, then play the Mentak Coalition. They sometimes become enemy number 1 just because they're so annoying, but generally they're not too strong in the way that they would go out and destroy people's stuff. They just get a lot of money off of both other players' money as well as their own technologies. Mentak have one of the strongest technologies in the game, which basically allows them to double the amount of value all of their money is worth, which is a very pirate thing to do, but you do have to really commit to a certain technology type in order to do that. This is another faction that can forcefully take other players' promissory notes, which can be very interesting, and their Thunder's Edge expansion Breakthrough also allows them to upgrade their cruisers to the Corsair, which is a super powerful, basically Cruiser 3 that is able to move all around the game board as this crazy pirate ship. So if you're okay with being annoying and a pirate, then I suggest playing the Mentak. It's actually not that hard to win with the Mentak because being rich, like we talked about with the Hacan, is generally a good thing, but they take the money instead of sort of earn the money and give it away. Alright, now we have the Naalu Collective. The Naalu Collective are actually not too mechanically complex, but you have to understand something, and that's the 0 token. So the initiative in Twilight Imperium really matters because it's the turn order in which you play out the action phase. But the Naalu Collective always have the 0 token that they place over their initiative value on their strategy card, and they always have an initiative of 0, which means that they go first. You go first not only in the action phase, but also the status phase too, which is the phase that you score objectives in, so that ability can be game-winning. They can sort of see the future and are telepaths in the way that they can retreat easily if other players come into their systems, so they sort of know what's going on before it actually happens. On top of everything else, your fighters are also generally stronger than everybody else's. They're called hybrid crystal fighters, and they just have a better combat value. So you create swarms of fighters, and you also go first no matter what. And that's the Naalu Collective. I have one word to sum up the Naaz-Rokha alliance, and that's solitaire. The Naaz-Rokha are all about 2 things, exploration and mechs. They were introduced in the Prophecy of Kings expansion and show off those 2 things that were introduced alongside them perfectly. Whenever they go to explore, they can draw 2 exploration cards and choose one of them to actually keep as their exploration. Additionally, they don't have to spend as many relic fragments in order to gain relics. So this is sort of ends up being the relic faction too, because they have the most amount of relics at the table in a normal game. They're all about uncovering things on planets, and they can continuously uncover the same things and keep exploring the same planets that they've already taken in previous rounds. They're honestly one of my favorite factions, and even though they are complex, they're not complex to a point that I wouldn't give them to a new player if they think it's really fun. I would say this is sort of middle ground complexity, and being able to re-explore planets and just drawing a ton of cards, matching different relic fragments together, and doing crazy stuff with those relics is a ton of fun. On top of this, they also have one of the most fun and cool breakthroughs in the Thunder's Edge expansion, where they get to combine their 4 powerful mechs into one Voltron-type mega mech that they can send anywhere they want across the board. So if you like playing a minigame within the game while still being super powerful, and you like Gurren Lagann, then I would pick the Naaz-Rokha Alliance. Here we have number 3 of 4 of do not play this if you're new, but it will seem tempting. The Nekro virus do not vote in the agenda phase because they are a crazy technological virus that needs to be purged from the galaxy. They don't vote because they actually predict, and if they're correct, they gain technologies. And that's because they don't research technologies in the normal way either. So you can't vote, you can't research technologies, instead you just gain a ton of command tokens. The Necrovirus gains so many command tokens if you're right on the predictions and everything that you may actually run out at a certain point. Additionally, they also start with their 2 faction technologies because they allow you to copy other players' faction technologies. The Necrovirus is all about combat, in the way that they take people's technologies and copy them for themselves if they win a combat against them. This makes it so the Necrovirus is a huge pest throughout the galaxy, but they are very strong, because at any point if somebody else has a technology, even a faction technology that you like, you can go over and copy it and take one for yourself. The reason why I don't suggest them for new players is because it kind of gets rid of that whole researching technology system that's built into the game, and it sort of makes you an enemy to most of the table because you do have to cause combats and predict on agendas in order to get what you need. Next up is the Nomad, and it's the only faction in the game that's actually only one singular person. Well, one person and their group of 5 leaders. The Nomad is all wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey, and is all about time travel and being in multiple places at the same time. The Nomad is the only faction to start with their flagship. Their flagship is also really powerful, and it can be upgraded, which is again the only faction to be able to do so. On top of this, not only being the flagship faction, the Nomad also has 3 agents instead of only 1 in the Prophecy of Kings expansion. The combination of your 3 agents, your commander, and your hero make up the Nomad's company, and definitely boost the power of the Nomad in really weird ways. Now, that being said, even though the Nomad has 5 leaders instead of only 3, and that's 2 more things to keep track of than normal, I don't actually think the Nomad is too complex for a beginner. That's because all of the Nomad stuff is basically about doing better in combat and gaining a ton of money. On top of that, the Nomad doesn't even have to spend that much money, because if they ever lose their flagship, their commander allows them to build the flagship again for free. If you liked the Muaat style of fewer but more powerful ships, I would pick the Nomad, because the Nomad is sort of a version of the Muaat that cares about their flagship and money, in the sense of money is everything. Alright, the Ral Nel Consortium is the final faction that I'll be talking about from the Thunder's Edge expansion in this video. The Ral Nel have a focus on moving their different structures around the board. So kind of like how the Clan of Saar can move their space docks, the Ral Nel can package up and move their space docks and PDS wherever they need them to go. On top of this, the Ral Nel also have special destroyers that are really, really fast. It's a 4 movement destroyer, which is higher than anything else on the board if it's upgraded. So your destroyers can transport planetary defense systems, which are the PDS units on the board, and they can actually fire space cannons from those units as they hold them and move around the game board with them. The Ral Nel also have a flexibility theme to them in that whenever somebody commits to attacking you, you can have other ships from other systems jump into that system, help you fight, and then jump back to where they were. It's sort of like a lizard dogpile. And moving up with their flexibility theme, they also are the only faction that can unpass during the action phase, and that's with their single-use hero. If you screw up and you pass too early, then you can jump back into the action phase with a whole bunch of goodies in order to make your turns even longer and crazier. They're a little bit complex, but they are wealthy, and I think the Ral Nel are pretty good all around for an experienced player to be able to put things out onto the galaxy and not really care exactly where they are, because they can always be flexible and move them around later. Now we have an absolute classic, the Sardakk Nor. The Sardakk only have one faction ability, and that's that all of your units get +1 on combat rolls. They also start with 0 technology. I would say do not play the Sardakk Nor at all, even if you're an experienced player, if you only have the base game of TI. Now, you can try and you can definitely win with them, but they just don't have much going on, and that +1 to combat rolls does not make up for their lack of technology or abilities. In both the Prophecy of Kings and Thunder's Edge expansions, if you have them, the Sardakk Nor got major upgrades. Now, they have a cool theme of being able to move ground forces around the game board without actually having to transport them with ships. So they're kind of like these bugs that can send themselves up into space and survive in space in order to crash land on another system and take it for themselves. They also have a very powerful breakthrough which allows them to gain more and more unit upgrades or command tokens as they win combats. The Sardakk Nor are one of those where they're very low complexity, but I don't actually think that the few tools that they do have help them push towards a victory. Sure, yeah, +1 to combat rolls help you take planets and may get you a couple points here and there, but you're not actually winning games with that ability, because TI is not about combat, it's about conquest. I'm just gonna be honest, the Titans of Ol are so cool. They're planet-sized monsters that live inside of planets, and they awaken throughout the game. Basically, you place tokens all around the game board. Those tokens can turn into a unit, which turns into a stronger unit, which could turn into an even stronger unit. They sort of grow and advance and awaken on planets like giant mega creatures. It's so neat. What their actual abilities are is that their PDSs can fight in combat, and their cruisers are very strong and fast. Both of their technologies have to do with both upgrading their PDS and upgrading their cruiser respectively, so they have pretty streamlined technologies. But overall, I think the Titans of Ol are just really good at scoring objectives. They have a lot of structure power and a lot of money power. Their hero is really fun because it basically upgrades your home system into a giant defense base with space cannon, and their breakthrough is a ton of fun because it actually allows you to coexist, kind of like the Deepwrought Scholaret, on other people's planets. They overall basically allow you to terraform systems, change systems to your will, and get out there fast with the Saturn engines. So overall, I think the Titans of Ol are powerful and up there in complexity, but not too insane. As long as you can handle the idea of having extra tokens, then I think you can handle the Titans. Here is the technology faction, even more so than the Deepwrought Scholaret. Whereas the Deepwrought like to share technology with the whole table, the universities of Jol-Nar get a ton of tech and keep everything for themselves. They're the only ones to start with more than 2 technologies, and they actually start with 4, one of each color. On top of this, you can continuously research more and more technology at a cheaper price than most other factions, and that's very powerful. Now their downside is that they have -1 to all combat rolls, which basically is the opposite of the Sardakk Nor. Where the Sardakk were more powerful, but they had no tech, the universities have all the tech, but are less powerful. And that's an absolutely fine trade-off. They don't really have too many abilities themselves. All of their abilities come from the fact that they are the technology faction. My idea with them is that if you can handle tons and tons of components out in front of you, being like a million technologies in a game, and even a hero that allows you to replace all of your technologies with other technologies you need, then I think that you're going to be okay as the universities. Their playstyle is streamlined because basically they just keep getting more abilities throughout the game. But if you are not able to fully understand TI and are going into it for a first time, I might stay away from the universities because they just continuously layer more and more abilities on an already complex game. Here's number 4. The Volwraith Cabal is something I don't think you should play as a beginner, but they are super cool, so let's chat about them. The Cabal, straight up, is enemy number 1. If you want to do the best with the Cabal, you will eat everybody else's ships, because they are space dragons that come from an alternate dimension called the Fracture, and have a lot of power in the Fracture. The Cabal have a mechanic called capturing, which essentially allows them that whenever they destroy another person's units, they, instead of placing those units back in their reinforcements, they give them to the Cabal player. The Cabal can hold on to them, and then when you produce units later, you can give back the units to that player in order to produce those units for free. This means that you are not snowballing as the Cabal if you're not continuously destroying other players. The Cabal also have space docks that are also black holes, or in the world of TI called gravity rifts. Gravity rifts are powerful things that can launch you forward, with the downside that your ships might blow up. But the Cabal have no such downside. They just get extra movement from those gravity rifts. Their leaders are fun, their playstyle is fun, but you straight up are going to be enemy number 1, so I wouldn't play them as a completely new player, but if you're alright with just being completely pounded into the ground if you make a mistake or two, then the Cabal might be for you. If you have the Thunder's Edge expansion, the Cabal got a lot stronger, and that's because they have tons of movement potential within the Fracture, an alternate universe that can enter the game due to the Thunder's Edge breakthroughs. If you're playing with Thunder's Edge, prioritize the Fracture because it'll allow the Cabal to get a ton of relics and other neutral units that they can eat. But that's getting a little too far into the faction guide sort of things. Basically, if you want to be super mean and eat player stuff and maybe even eliminate a player in the process, the Cabal's for you. Now we have my favorite faction in the game, the Winnu, and they're so stupid and boring. The Winnu are the Glass Cannon faction, and they care about Mechatol Rex, which is the center planet in the galaxy. If they do get to Mechatol Rex, or in the case of having the expansions, legendary planets as well, then they are super powerful, but the problem is they still have to control their home system. You get stretched really thin, and you have a bunch of power on Mechatol Rex and are able to score points, and especially with Prophecy of Kings, really score Imperial points, but you still have to keep yourself held back in order to hold your home system. This is why I say the Winnu is a glass cannon, because they truly care about one thing, and it's Mechatol Rex or bust. If you're playing with Prophecy of Kings, then the Winnu get a little bit better because their mechs are really good at placing structures along the way in order to protect your system and make things out into the world that you really need. One way or another, I wouldn't necessarily recommend them for new players, but they're not too crazy complex. One way or another, Mechatol Rex or bust can be a very fun but very flat playstyle. Now we have the diplomatic turtles, the Xxcha Kingdom. Believe it or not, they're all about turtling. As you take your head out of the gutter, what I truly mean by that is that they're all about building up a shell of protection with their PDS units around their home system and not letting anybody pass. They're super defensive. On top of this, they're also really good at scoring agendas because they can veto or quash the agendas that they don't want to see. A lot of people will also pay you to quash agendas that they don't want, so you can wheel and deal that for even more money. They can also take planets diplomatically, which basically they don't have to commit to a system and actually move ships there to take it forcefully. They can just slowly gain influence and flip those planets to their side. They're one of the factions that got the strongest and most versatile breakthrough in the Thunder's Edge expansion, so I definitely would go for that if I was the Xxcha, because it's all about being able to use influence as resources and vice versa in a flexible way. But for the most part, if you like turtling, defensiveness, and have a love for agendas during the agenda phase, the Xxcha Kingdom is for you. The Yin Brotherhood is a million clones of this one specific guy. In that sense, during the actual mechanics of the game, you can indoctrinate people into the Brotherhood. So as you take planets, you can replace the infantry on those planets with your own infantry and make it easier for you to win ground combat. The Yin are kind of a ground combat faction, but they also have fun things to do with their flagship, as well as turning things into infantry and fighters. Their flagship is a giant bomb, and whenever it blows up everything else in the system, which can definitely help you win games. Additionally, they make more infantry natively with their faction technology, so they do get to kind of swarm the board with a whole lot of infantry. Not as strong as the flexibility of the Federation of Soul, but their infantry do get to do weird, fun things. Additionally, they got one of the weirdest breakthroughs in which they can just copy the abilities of random unused factions. So if you're playing with Thunder's Edge, I definitely would more suggest them for new players, because you just get a fun, random, crazy thing every so often. The Yin are not necessarily my favorite, but they're a pretty streamlined faction, and I do enjoy playing them from time to time. And finally, we have the Yssaril tribes. The Yssaril are all about action cards, those cards that give you extra abilities that you can use throughout the game. Basically, they can draw more action cards than a normal person, they don't have a max action card limit, and they can stall out people in order to use their action cards later in a round after everybody else has passed. They have weird abilities, and an especially confusing ability if you're using the Prophecy of Kings expansion, but overall the Yssaril tribes just being the secretive, sneaky, conniving action card faction can actually make them a lot of fun for a new player, and I don't think their complexity is that mechanically high. They have a small sub-theme of being able to look at hidden information, but for the most part it's just basically the power of the Yssaril is the information that they have that nobody else has. And there is all 30 factions in Twilight Imperium. If you have any questions about any of the factions, please leave them in the comments section down below. Down there, you may also notice that some people have membership badges. If you want to support the channel and get fun perks like membership badges and exclusive videos, such as the lore storytime videos that I'll link in the top right corner in the card, please consider becoming a YouTube channel member at either the student or professor tier. We also have a crash test dummy tier for only $2 a month if you just love these videos and want to support the Cardboard Crash Course. Again, if you haven't watched the Twilight Imperium Beginner's Guide video, please go to the description down below and click on it in order to learn the basic mechanics of Twilight Imperium. Thank you so much for watching. I've been Ethan. Pax Magnifica, Bellum Gloriosum.